makes their own decisions and everybody makes their own choices, but they're not the only ones that suffer the consequences. We wanted to come out and say the truth, and I feel like we did that. And looking back, I still would have done that. I still would have said the truth of what happened. But knowing now what Joshua was hiding, I feel like, it wasn't right for him to let us speak our words without having the full knowledge of what he was hiding.
Welcome down the rabbit hole, friends. We're going to quickly finish up chapter 2 because I just got my son to sleep. He's actually quite sick tonight. I think it's possible he might have COVID, which is apropos because a more serious virus on a night that we're going to be discussing a very serious topic and a really hard time in Jill's life. So I want to make it through the end of chapter 2. If my son needs me, I'll have to peace out for a little bit. But let's get through the end of this chapter. And tomorrow I will hopefully be able to put out chapter 3. And my son is doing just fine, just needs a lot of extra care right now. And I think that during the time described here in Jill's life, she really needed a lot of extra care too. Care that she potentially didn't receive. And it's here that I want to talk about something that isn't really examined in the book, but occurs to me as I read through the end of this chapter, and I'm going to relate it to a difficult time in my life. During COVID, I've told you a little bit about this before, I had a really hard time with being a mom because I was just coming to the understanding that my youngest son was going to be diagnosed as being on the spectrum. And during that time, I spent so much energy pouring into my son. I saw him as having a lot of needs that it was incumbent upon me to fulfill in every way, shape, and form. And because I was so worried for him and concerned about his future, unfortunately, I put my daughter on the back burner a lot of the time because she had always been happy and at the top of her class and thriving through a lot of difficult moods and hard times. And I assumed that she didn't need me in the way that my son did. Now, we're about 3 years out from COVID, and looking back, I realize that my daughter was the one who needed me the most during that time, and I didn't realize it. There were many indicators, and I was blind to them because of my own personal anxiety, who was going through a hard time. And I assumed that I could put my strongest child aside. And that's what I think happened to Jill a lot in her childhood, as exemplified in this passage as well, because there was a lot going on for Jim Bob and Michelle with their eldest son, Josh. And it's not making an excuse. We know that Jim Bob and Michelle have made a lot of terrible decisions, and I'm not here to defend them, but I'm looking at all of the angles that we can dissect this book from. And one angle that I'm coming to this passage with is that I can imagine Jim Bob and Michelle made a lot of bad decisions based upon the fact that they had their own extreme anxiety about what was going on with Josh. They poured into him while other children were pushed aside. maybe none so much as Jill, because she was thought of as the strongest, the best, the hero, the sweet Jilly Muffin, who had so much faith in the Lord and was carrying the family forward and helping with all of the younger kids. And we're about to hear that there were some very hard things going on in the background of her own personal life as the other 18 kids swarmed around her and Josh's needs had to be met and her parents weren't sure what to do. Jill was outwardly standing strong, but fighting an internal battle in which she needed help and support that I don't think she really received. Okay, so the second part of chapter 2 starts with a letter. If you're not aware, I've done extensive videos about the Holt family. They are a family of fundamentalist Christians who were best friends with the Duggar family at one point in time. And I've also done some deep dives about their daughter, Kaylee Holt. It's a very sensitive subject. It's been a hard subject to bring to my channel, but that's what Jill is going to be discussing in this passage, because at some point in Josh's young life, he was betrothed to Kaylee and they were spending time with one another, both at the Duggar home as well as the Holt family home, and also at times when he was working for Jim Holt, Kaylee's father, on the campaign trail. But all of that ended when Josh was forced to tell the Holt family what had happened between himself and his sisters, and the betrothal was broken. At that time, Kaylee Holt wrote a letter. Now, all of the research I've done has led me to believe that Kaylee testified saying that the letter was actually kind of like a journal entry written to her favorite author. And it was all about what had happened to her with Josh and her feelings about it. But in this book, Jill gives us a different perspective. So at this time, Josh had moved back in with the family and the show was going forward. It had been a couple of years since the events that originally happened with Josh. Jill does not name Kaylee Holt by name. Instead, she says, Josh had been courting a girl. He must have confessed to her vaguely about the ABUSC that he had committed, because I heard later that that girl had written a letter to him expressing her anger at what he'd done, but instead of sending it to him, she tucked it away in a book. All right. Now, again, the testimony that I read from Kaylee said that she had actually written the letter as a journal entry to her favorite author, but either way, it could be 2 letters or there could just be a disparity in what Jill was told. So Kaylee Holt tucked this letter away. It gave an accounting of what Josh had done. At that point, not many people knew about it, only a few people in the community, people that the Duggars were close with in the church. But 4 years later, in 2006, Kaylee Holt loaned the book to a friend in the church. The friend found the letter, shared it with her family. They talked about what to do. They talked to the Holts about it. They brought the Duggars in, and now many people came to know what had happened to the girls, to the Duggar girls, when Josh had been inappropriate with his sisters. Eventually, the letter made the rounds to someone at the church, and that person was taken aback by what she came to find out had happened with Josh, and instead of going to the Duggars as many had done before her, she went ahead and called a hotline and informed DHS about what she thought was a potentially abusive situation going on in the Duggar home. Fast forward to the Duggars. They have arrived in Chicago and they've appeared on the Oprah Winfrey Show together. They actually were also attending their first IBLP headquarters Christmas party. So their fame was in full swing, and they're thinking that everything that's happened with Josh is in the past. While they were still in Chicago, Jim Bob Duggar receives a call notifying him that Oprah has been notified about some inappropriate behaviors that went on with the family in the past, and she's going to have to pass that information on to authorities. From Jill's perspective, she's told that an investigation is going to take place and that they are going to have to testify in a court, but that it would be a closed court session. They needed to tell everything about what had happened to them from their perspective so that CPS, DHS could be fully assured that these children were safe within their home. And from Jill's perspective, things are frightening. She writes, people, strangers, would come to our house at random times to make sure there were locks on our doors and that everybody was sleeping where they were supposed to be sleeping. It was terrifying. For Jill, she makes it clear that this intervention from the state was more frightening for her than when the actual event occurred and everything went down within the family. It lets us know that she was terribly scared that she herself or another sibling would say the wrong thing during all these interviews or whenever someone was visiting, and that they would be taken away from mom and pops. One wrong word, one bad answer, and I'll be the one who tears the family apart, she writes. Jill says, I tried not to let my fear show. I tried to bury it deep inside. But I was older now, and there was more at stake. It didn't just affect me, it affected all of us. So it was harder to bury the fear caused by the investigation than the fear caused by the abuse. Jill makes it clear that she was very frightened that she would be taken away from her parents or that some of the other kids would be taken away. And we know that it's a common fear held by many people within the community that Jill was a part of. But Jill lets us know that her mom and dad, she felt that they were being pretty supportive, that they were taking time to sit with the kids, to pray with them, to let them know to the best of their ability what was going on, what was expected, and to be supportive. They did give advice, and their advice was, according to Jill, just tell the truth. They both said many times, it's a safe place, and they're just doing their job. Tell the truth and everything will work out fine. So I'm grateful to hear that. We're not getting information from Jill that her parents were like, don't say anything, don't do anything. But I think Jim Bob and Michelle had already kind of like diminished what had happened to the girls' faces. Like they had already said to them, this is no big deal. Like, it's not, so they had already kind of primed them to be very like, nothing bad happened. I didn't even know about it. And maybe that's exactly how it was, but I mean, it does have to do with how the parents had portrayed it to the children, right? But for Jill in the background, she was just terribly fearful and she couldn't talk to anyone about it. And that's where it comes in, kind of what I was talking about in my own like minor experience, that it's really easy to have a child who you think is so brave and so strong and always does the right thing, and you start pouring so much of yourself into another child thinking that that's the one that's going to need the support. And now we are hearing from Jill that behind the scenes she was really struggling. She writes, I was bound up tight in my own fear, but not so tight that I didn't notice that Pops was feeling badly too. He was angry. I had heard that the person who found the letter and phoned the hotline had also talked to a few other people at church. Okay. So she does let us know, and I think we've heard some of this. There's been some rumors about it before, but she confirms it and expands that the person who found the letter told many other people in the church, and Jim Bob was very frustrated with this. He came right out and said to his family, to everyone in the church, why didn't that person come to me and Michelle? They did not need to go to the authorities. They did not need to go to church leaders. They should have come to me and talked about it. So he kind of has this whole idea that all of this should be taken care of under the table. You know, we're hiding things. We don't go to the government. We don't go to the police. Jill says that it was hard because they had a small home church. Some families treated us kindly and with compassion, but I believe others were jealous of our success with the television show and treated us with suspicion. And Jim Bob was like feeding into this idea, and I do believe that some of that was probably true. I still believe that to this day, that some of the sources that speak out about the Duggars, there is some jealousy that might be going on, or maybe they had a bad interaction with the Duggars, and now this is their way to get some of that off their chest. But it doesn't take away from the fact that there were like horrible things going on in that home, and that they were part of a CULT, and there was just so much going on. So it kind of feeds in both ways. Like, yes, these people might have an axe to grind, but there's also a lot to pick on about what's going on with the Duggars. Now, Jim Bob is in the background, and he's saying things like, they threw us to the wolves, Pops said when the investigation concluded. They did not stick up for us at all. They're the ones who made this happen. They're the ones who allowed DHS to investigate our family, even though we had already taken care of it. So he's pretty frustrated and angry with the community and the church. He's not happy with them anymore. And the fallout was immense. We've heard rumors of this before. Jill says she didn't know who she could trust anymore. The family was very suspicious of everyone. They decided to pull back from the church. They no longer allowed people to host services at the big house, and there was a big divide within the church, and finally it split. And she says, like Pops, I was angry and hurt. Lastly, Jill says this, but when it was all over, all I wanted to do was put it behind me. I had been terrified of losing my family and traumatized by the questions I had been forced to answer. I wanted to forget all about it. I wanted to move on from the whole thing as fast and as far away as possible. All right, that's the end of chapter 2. The next chapter 3 is called Clipped Wings and Hills to Die On. I can't wait to get into this one. There's a lot of interesting things in this chapter and good times as well. I like to hear about the good times she had with her family, and I would love to talk about it now, but I need to get everything ready for tomorrow for my son and my daughter. So unfortunately, we'll have to wait a little bit longer for chapter 3. Thank you so much for being here with me tonight. I hope you'll join me again next time when we head down yet another rabbit hole.